John Carter had never expected to be caught. He had fought valiantly against the alien forces, battling with everything he had. Yet, despite his courage and strength, the sheer numbers of the alien invaders overwhelmed him. The last thing he saw before being knocked unconscious was a glowing, strange face that seemed to smirk with triumph. When he awoke, he was no longer on the battlefield, but in a cold, dimly lit cell. The walls were made of a metal he had never seen before, glowing faintly in the darkness. His arms were shackled to the wall, his head still spinning from the brutal hit he had taken. He could feel the alien ship's movements beneath him, a low hum that made him uneasy. The aliens had taken him. They were a brutal, unforgiving race, known for their ruthlessness. They saw humans as nothing more than pests, primitive creatures who were easily conquered. John had heard rumors of the alien empire, but nothing had prepared him for the vastness of their cruelty. As he lay there, trying to clear his mind and assess his situation, a soft clicking noise echoed down the corridor. The sound of boots on metal floors. His eyes narrowed as he turned his head toward the sound, but no one appeared. John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His body ached, and his thoughts were scattered, but his mind was sharp. He had been through worse. He had survived battles where the odds were far worse. The question wasn't whether he could escape. He had no doubt that he could, but when the right moment would come, he refused to give up. The aliens had made a mistake by thinking they could break him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The door to his cell suddenly opened, and a tall alien, its skin a deep shade of purple, stepped inside. The alien looked down at him, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. "Human," it said in a voice that felt like ice scraping against metal. "You are in our custody now. We will take you to the highest security prison, where you will never escape." John gritted his teeth. The alien's arrogance was almost laughable. It thought he was just another prisoner, another captive to add to their collection. But John knew something the alien didn't. Humans never gave up. They never stayed down for long. His eyes met the aliens, and for a moment, they locked in a silent battle of wills. The alien seemed to hesitate, almost as if it could sense the danger in John's gaze. But then it smirked again, and John knew it was not yet afraid. They didn't know him. They didn't know what he was capable of. The alien stepped forward, his gaze turning more calculating. "Your species will fall," it said softly. "You are nothing compared to us." John's heart raced. He wasn't a man of many words, but he couldn't stay silent anymore. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice rough but filled with unwavering certainty. "You'll regret ever underestimating humanity." The alien's smile faded slightly, but it didn't respond. Instead, it simply signaled to the guards. 2 more aliens appeared, dragging John to his feet. Despite the shackles on his wrists, John remained calm, his eyes scanning the area, looking for any opportunity to break free. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he wasn't afraid. He had faced impossible situations before. As the guards marched him down the cold, metallic hallways of the alien ship, John couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. He had been captured, but he wouldn't be broken. The aliens thought they had won. They thought they had captured a human who was nothing more than a prisoner. But what they didn't understand was that there was no such thing as a captive human, not when humanity's back was against the wall. The guards shoved him roughly into a transport pod, and the door slammed shut. The pod hummed to life, and John could feel the sudden shift as it propelled into space. The alien prison was far away, but John's resolve burned brighter than ever. He had been captured, yes, but this was only the beginning. As the cold metal of the pod pressed against his skin, he made a promise to himself. He would escape, and when he did, the aliens would know the true strength of humanity. John wasn't just a prisoner. He was the spark that would ignite the fire of revenge. And soon, the galaxy would learn that no prison could hold him. and no alien empire would survive the wrath of humanity. John sat quietly in the cold, dimly lit cell, his wrists still shackled to the wall. The pain from the brutal hit he had taken earlier was still fresh, but his mind was already working, calculating, analyzing. He had been through worse. He had survived battles with impossible odds, and this was no different. The only thing that had changed was his surroundings. An alien prison ship deep in enemy territory. The walls were made of strange, glowing metal that hummed with energy. There was no way out. At least not yet. His heart pounded, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the need to escape, from the desire to fight back. The aliens had underestimated him, thinking he was just another helpless prisoner. But they were wrong. He would show them what humanity was capable of. They thought they had captured a weak, vulnerable human, but they had no idea what they were dealing with. As John closed his eyes for a moment to gather his thoughts, he heard something. The soft sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor outside his cell. His senses heightened, his breath slowing as he strained to hear. The footsteps grew louder. 2 alien guards rounded the corner and stopped in front of his cell. They were tall, their dark green skin almost glowing in the faint light. They exchanged a few words in a language John didn't understand. Then one of them turned to face him. "You're awake," the alien said, its voice cold and emotionless. "You're lucky we don't kill you right now." John narrowed his eyes. The alien's words were meant to intimidate, but he had faced far worse. They thought they could scare him, break him. But they didn't know that humans never gave up. "You'll regret this," John muttered, his voice rough but steady. The alien looked at him, a small, mocking grin playing at the corners of its mouth. "We have no need to regret. You are in our custody now. Your planet is as good as ours." John's eyes flared with anger, but he held himself back. The guards weren't worth his energy right now. He needed to think, to plan. He couldn't fight these aliens head-on, at least not yet. But that didn't mean he was defeated. Far from it. One of the aliens reached through the bars, unlocking the cell door. John tensed, but remained still. The alien stepped back, allowing the door to open. Without warning, the second guard grabbed him by the arm and yanked him forward. John stumbled but quickly regained his balance. His mind was already running through possibilities. He would find a way out. He had to. As they dragged him down the cold, metallic hallway, John kept his eyes moving, studying every detail. The way the guards walked, the layout of the ship, the sounds that echoed off the walls. Everything mattered. Every small detail could be the key to his escape. They led him to a larger chamber, where a high-ranking alien officer stood waiting. This one was different. Its skin was a deep purple, almost regal in appearance, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. It was the kind of being that commanded respect, even fear. But John felt none of it. He was beyond fear now. He had been through too much, too many battles. He knew what it meant to survive. The alien officer looked John up and down with a disdainful sneer. "You are the human we captured," it said, its voice dripping with arrogance. "You are weak. Your species is weak, and you will break just like all the others." John's heart quickened, but not from fear. Anger burned in his chest. He had heard those words before. Weak, defenseless, but they had never understood humanity. John was the proof. He was living, breathing evidence that humans didn't break. They fought. They fought with everything they had. "I'm not like the others," John said, his voice low but firm. "You'll see. You'll regret underestimating us." The officer's expression twisted into a cold smile. "I doubt that. You'll spend the rest of your life in our prison, a forgotten relic. And when we're done with you, we will crush your planet. Your species will fall, just like all the others who dared to resist." John said nothing. There was nothing more to say. The officer turned away, giving a signal to the guards to take him to his cell. John followed without resistance, but inside, his mind was already working. His resolve was stronger than ever. The galaxy had no idea what it had just unleashed. When the cell door slammed shut behind him once more, John sat down, his back pressed against the cold wall. His mind was clear now. He had no illusions. This was only the beginning. He was in enemy hands. Yes, but that was nothing new. The aliens had captured him, but they hadn't broken him. They had made a mistake. They didn't know that humanity wasn't just a species. It was a force of nature. And soon, they would learn that they had made the worst mistake of their lives. You said. The days passed in a blur of harsh routines and cold, sterile walls. John had been tossed from one holding cell to another, his shackles barely giving him enough room to stretch his limbs. The aliens didn't speak to him anymore, treating him like a trophy, something to gloat over, not a threat. But that suited him just fine. The less attention they paid him, the more time he had to study the ship's inner workings, to plan. He wasn't just going to escape, he was going to make them regret this. The alien prison ship was massive, far larger than anything John had ever seen. Its corridors twisted and turned like a labyrinth, designed to confuse and disorient anyone who wandered into them. The walls were made of a slick, silvery metal that seemed to pulse with energy. There were no windows, no signs of life beyond the guards who paced back and forth. But John knew better than to assume there were no weak points. Every time they moved him, every time they changed his cell, he was paying attention. His mind worked quickly, his body adjusting to the endless grind of captivity. He knew he wasn't alone in this prison. There were other humans here too, though most of them were broken, their spirits crushed by the long years of captivity. They had lost hope. They had forgotten who they were, but not John. He was different. He hadn't lost his fire. His first chance came during the 4th day of his imprisonment. The guards weren't as vigilant as they had been in the beginning. They thought they had him under control, that he was just another prisoner to be kept in line. They didn't know him. They didn't know how dangerous a trapped animal could be when it was pushed too far. John had noticed a pattern in their shifts. They changed the guards every few hours, with the same ones circling back to him. It was a small thing, but it gave him the knowledge he needed. The key to his escape was not brute force. It was patience, observation, and a single perfect moment to strike. It was early in the morning when it happened. One of the guards, a tall, hulking alien, was assigned to watch him for the next few hours. John had already memorized the guard's routine. The alien had a tendency to make the rounds and then spend several minutes standing by the door, looking out into the corridor. It was during these moments that John had his chance. The guard was distracted, his attention split between watching the hallway and keeping an eye on John. John knew this was his moment. He had been waiting for it, mentally preparing himself. He had no weapons, no tools, nothing but his fists and his wits. But he had something more valuable than any weapon. He had humanity's resolve. As the guard stepped away from the door, just for a moment, John lunged forward, using every ounce of his strength to slam his shoulder into the alien's chest. The impact was jarring, sending the guard stumbling back. The creature let out a growl of surprise, reaching for the stun weapon strapped to its waist. But John was faster. He grabbed the guard's arm, twisting it in an unnatural angle, using the alien's own momentum against it. The guard hissed, but John was relentless. His training kicked in, the years of combat drills, the countless fights he'd been in. He didn't give the guard a chance to recover. With a swift motion, he slammed the alien into the wall, knocking the wind out of it. The stun weapon clattered to the floor, and John grabbed it without hesitation. He knew he didn't have much time. The ship was vast, and there were cameras everywhere. But for now, he had one weapon, and that was enough. He quickly dragged the guard's unconscious body into the corner of the cell, out of sight, and pulled the stun weapon into his hands. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. John had no idea how long it would take for the next guard to arrive. They could be coming for him at any moment, But he wasn't going to waste this opportunity. He had no plan beyond getting out of this cell and finding a way off the ship. He had no map, no idea where the ship's escape pods were, but he didn't need them. He would improvise. With a final glance at the guard's body, John turned toward the hallway. He knew the ship's layout well enough now to make a guess. He had to go left. He had to find a way to get past the other guards and make his way to an area where the ship's systems were less secure. That was where he could find a way to escape. As he stepped into the corridor, the cold, metallic walls of the prison ship seemed to close in on him. His pulse raced, but his mind stayed calm. He could do this. He was human. He wasn't going to let these aliens win. For the first time since his capture, John felt a spark of hope. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, thinking that they were just a small, insignificant species, but John was proof of something far greater. Humanity's strength came from its will to survive, to fight, and to never give up. And as John moved down the dark hallway, the weight of the moment settled in. This was just the beginning. The aliens had made a mistake. They had underestimated a single human, and now they would see what humanity was capable of. John moved quickly, his footsteps echoing softly on the cold metal floor as he navigated the dimly lit corridors of the alien ship. His heart raced, but his mind remained focused. Every step he took was a calculated risk, every turn a potential trap. The guards wouldn't be far behind, and the ship's security systems could be triggered at any moment. But there was no turning back now. He had come too far, and there was only one thing on his mind: escape. The stun weapon in his hand felt strangely heavy, but John had a single goal. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The ship was a maze, and he knew he had to act fast before the aliens realized something was wrong. He passed several cells, each containing other prisoners, humans, aliens, and other creatures. But John didn't stop. He couldn't afford to waste time. His mission was bigger than just getting out of his own cell. He had to strike back, to make sure the galaxy knew that humanity would not go down without a fight. As he rounded a corner, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. His pulse quickened, and he ducked into a nearby alcove, pressing himself against the wall. His breath slowed, and he gripped the stun weapon tightly. The footsteps grew louder, and he could hear two voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand. He peeked around the corner just in time to see two alien guards approaching. They were tall and broad-shouldered, their alien armor gleaming in the faint light. They hadn't seen him yet. John's instincts kicked in. He wasn't going to wait for them to notice him. He stepped out of the alcove with quiet precision, aiming the stun weapon at the nearest guard. With a single pull of the trigger, a bolt of energy shot out, hitting the alien square in the chest. The guard collapsed instantly, twitching violently before falling unconscious. The second guard turned, but John was already on him. He closed the distance in an instant, slamming the stun weapon into the guard's face with all his strength. The alien staggered back, stunned but not out. John pressed his advantage, using his body weight to tackle the guard to the ground. They wrestled for a moment, but John's training gave him the upper hand. He twisted the guard's arm behind its back, forcing it into a painful submission hold. The alien let out a growl of frustration, but it couldn't escape. With a final twist, John knocked the guard unconscious, leaving the alien in a heap on the floor. John stood over the fallen guards, panting slightly from the exertion. He had no time to dwell on his success. He needed to keep moving. He checked the weapons they carried, but they were unfamiliar, too advanced for him to use. Instead, he grabbed a few small devices from their belts, communication tools, most likely. These could be useful later. He turned back toward the hallway, his mind racing. The aliens had to know something was wrong by now. There was no way they wouldn't realize their guards were down. He had to move quickly. He had to find a way to get to the ship's control center, or at least a place where he could trigger the alarms to create chaos. That's when he heard it, a voice, distant but unmistakable, crackling through the comm device in his hand. "Report in," the voice ordered, its tone cold and commanding. "The human prisoner is not to be left unattended. Where is your post?" John's heart skipped a beat. The voice wasn't from one of the guards. It was from someone higher up, someone who would know how to track him. He had no idea how much time he had before reinforcements arrived. He had to move faster. He kept his pace steady, staying low to avoid detection. His mind worked quickly, formulating a plan. If he could reach the control room, he might be able to shut down the ship's security systems, or even turn the communications against them. Maybe he could signal for help from Earth. The possibilities were endless, but so were the dangers. Every step brought him closer to the heart of the enemy ship, but it also brought him closer to getting caught. As he moved deeper into the ship, John passed by more cells, more prisoners. Some of them watched him pass with hopeless eyes, while others seemed too lost in their own pain to notice. But there was one cell, one prisoner, who caught his eye. It was a human, no older than John himself. The man looked broken, gaunt, and thin, his face hollow with despair. He was shackled to the wall, and his clothes were ragged. But what struck John most was the empty look in his eyes, a look that said he had given up. John stopped for a moment, his heart aching. He had no time to help him. He had to focus on the mission. But as he turned to leave, the prisoner whispered in a hoarse voice, "Don't let them win." John paused, the words echoing in his mind. He couldn't leave this man behind. He couldn't leave any of them behind. Humanity didn't just fight for itself. It fought for everyone. It fought for hope. With newfound determination, John turned and approached the cell. He quickly disabled the locking mechanism and pulled the door open. The prisoner blinked in confusion, but when John extended a hand, the man slowly took it. "Come with me," John whispered urgently. "We're getting out of here." Together, they moved quickly, keeping low and avoiding the guards. John had no idea what awaited them ahead, but he was certain of one thing. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom anymore. He was fighting for everyone in this ship, for humanity's honor, and for the revenge that was long overdue. The galaxy would learn that underestimating humanity was the last mistake anyone would make. John and the prisoner moved silently through the cold, metallic halls, the distant hum of the ship's engines vibrating beneath their feet. The urgency of their escape was like a fire in John's chest, but now there was something more, something that had started to burn deep within him. It was the weight of responsibility. He wasn't just escaping for himself anymore. He was fighting for the lives of the others, for everyone who had been wronged. As they turned a corner, John motioned for the prisoner to stop. The hallway ahead was quiet, but John's sharp instincts told him they weren't alone. He crouched low and peeked around the corner. There, about 20 feet away, a patrol of 4 alien soldiers was heading toward them. They were big, armed to the teeth, and their movements were precise, too precise. These weren't just random guards. They were the elite. John's heart pounded in his chest. There was no way to fight them all. Not without getting caught. He glanced at the prisoner, whose wide, fearful eyes mirrored the exact thoughts running through John's mind. The prisoner didn't have the strength to fight. The chains around his wrists were a constant reminder of that. "We need to find another way," John whispered, pulling the man back into the shadows. "Stay close." They needed to act fast. The patrol was close enough now that if they were spotted, there wouldn't be enough time to run or hide. John's mind raced, scanning the area. He spotted an alcove up ahead, barely big enough to hide the two of them. It was their only shot. "Follow me," John ordered, his voice low but firm. The prisoner nodded, his expression a mix of fear and hope. They sprinted for the alcove, stepping lightly to avoid making any noise. When they reached it, they pressed themselves into the narrow space, holding their breath. The sound of footsteps grew louder. John could feel the prisoner's chest heaving beside him, but he couldn't risk making the sound. The patrol passed within inches of their hiding spot. John's heart felt like it was beating in his throat, but the aliens didn't notice them. They didn't even slow down. When the patrol was out of earshot, John allowed himself to exhale, his hand still gripping the stun weapon tightly. That was too close, he muttered under his breath. But the prisoner didn't respond. He just stared ahead, his face pale. John gave him a moment to regain some composure. They were running out of time. The ship's security was tightening, and soon the entire vessel would be on high alert. But there was one last chance, one final move that could give them the upper hand. They had to get to the ship's control room. John had learned a lot about the ship's layout during his captivity, and he knew where the command center was. If he could get to it, he could override the ship's systems, create a diversion, and maybe even open up escape routes. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The control room was heavily guarded, and now that they were on the run, any wrong move could trigger alarms. He motioned for the prisoner to follow him again. They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows, and soon they reached the junction that would lead them to the control room. John peeked around the corner, his eyes scanning for any sign of the guards. The hallway was clear. "We're close," John whispered, but the prisoner's face was filled with doubt. "Can you do this?" John asked, his voice calm but insistent. The prisoner hesitated before nodding. I think so," he said, his voice shaky but determined. It was clear he wasn't used to thinking for himself anymore. The long years of captivity had worn him down, but John could see a spark in him. He wasn't completely broken. John clapped him on the shoulder. "Then let's go. We don't have much time." They moved quickly but quietly, heading toward the control room's entrance. John's senses were on high alert now. He was sure that the aliens were already aware of their escape. They just didn't know where they were yet. The control room door loomed in front of them, its cold surface glinting under the artificial lighting. It was heavily reinforced, but John had noticed something during his observations. There was a vent above the door, small, but big enough for them to crawl through. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best option. John didn't hesitate. He motioned for the prisoner to stay put and approached the vent. The door's security panel was beside it, and John used his knowledge to quickly disable the lock. He pried the vent cover open, peering inside. It was a tight squeeze, but they could make it. "Ready?" John asked, his eyes meeting the prisoner's. The prisoner nodded, though it was clear he wasn't sure what would happen next. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to know," John replied softly. "You just have to trust me." The prisoner swallowed hard, then pulled himself into the vent. John followed closely behind, sliding in just as the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. They were almost out of time. The vent system was narrow and claustrophobic, but it was their way in. They crawled slowly, the sound of their breathing louder in the confined space than it had been outside. Every movement had to be precise. One mistake could send them plummeting to the floor below. When they reached the end of the vent, John peered through the grate. The control room was just beyond. He could see the alien officers moving around, discussing plans, oblivious to the fact that two humans were making their way into their domain. John took a deep breath. This was it. The final step toward revenge. The final step toward freedom. But there was no room for hesitation. This was their only chance. John moved carefully, his fingers gripping the edges of the vent grate as he prepared to push it open. He could hear the voices of the aliens in the control room growing louder, their conversation filled with authority and strange, indecipherable commands. His mind raced. There was no going back now. If they were caught, everything would be over. But if they succeeded, if they made it to the control room, this ship would be theirs to command, and the galaxy would finally see what humanity was capable of. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly pried the vent grate loose, making sure the noise was as minimal as possible. The prisoner, now with a glimmer of hope in his eyes, was close behind. John signaled for him to stay quiet, and with a final push, the vent grate was free. The opening was just big enough for them to slip through. John was the first to slide out, landing softly on the floor of the control room. The room was dimly lit, filled with rows of strange consoles and glowing screens. Alien symbols flickered across the monitors, some displaying charts, others flashing red warnings. The room was occupied by 3 alien officers, tall, armored beings who stood in front of a central console, completely unaware of the humans sneaking up behind them. John held his breath. His eyes darted to the central command panel, where he could see a blinking red light, indicating that a security alert had been triggered. They had to act fast. He motioned for the prisoner to stay put for a moment and crouched behind a large control station, peering out toward the aliens. They were still engaged in conversation, oblivious to the intruders in their midst. John's fingers tightened around the stun weapon he had stolen earlier. One wrong move, and this whole plan would fall apart. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's revenge. For every person who had suffered, for every prisoner left to rot in this alien ship. John took a deep breath and, in a swift motion, aimed his stun weapon at the nearest alien officer. He fired. The bolt of energy hit the alien square in the chest, and it crumpled to the floor in an instant, unconscious. The other 2 aliens froze for a split second, shocked by the sudden attack. "Move," John hissed at the prisoner. The prisoner didn't hesitate. He darted forward, grabbing a loose piece of alien equipment that had been left unattended. John fired again, taking out the second alien before it could react. The third one reached for its weapon, but it was too slow. John was already on him, tackling the alien to the floor with a force fueled by the anger and desperation that had been building inside him for so long. The alien struggled, but John quickly twisted its arm behind its back, subduing it with a swift motion. Panting, John glanced up to see the prisoner standing beside him, his face wide-eyed but determined. "We did it," the prisoner whispered, disbelief in his voice. John didn't have time to celebrate. He turned to the control panel, already moving toward it. His fingers flew over the buttons, scanning the alien interface. It was nothing like Earth technology, but after years of captivity, John had learned to read their symbols. He found the right sequence of buttons and pressed them with practiced ease. The security alarms blared louder, but now they were working in their favor. Suddenly, the ship's interior lights flickered and went out. The ship shuddered, the hum of its engines faltering. John glanced up at the prisoner, who looked at him in stunned silence. The controls were offline, and the doors to the control room slammed shut. The ship had gone into lockdown mode. John cursed under his breath. He had hoped for a cleaner escape, but now they were locked inside. He had no choice but to improvise. He turned back to the console, desperately searching for a way to override the lockdown. The red warning lights blinked ominously, but his eyes darted over the symbols, looking for a way out. "Come on," John muttered, frustration building. Then his finger paused over a symbol that looked like it might be a manual override. Without hesitation, he pressed it. For a brief moment, the room was silent. Then the doors to the control room opened with a hiss, and the ship's systems flickered back to life. John breathed a sigh of relief, but the sense of danger hadn't passed. They needed to move quickly. "Let's go," he said, grabbing the prisoner by the arm and pulling him toward the door. "We're not out of this yet." They made their way down the hallway, moving quickly but cautiously. The ship was still in chaos, and John knew they had no time to waste. He had no idea how much time they had before reinforcements arrived, but he knew one thing. Their best shot at survival lay in getting back to the docking bay. If they could commandeer a ship, they might just make it out alive. As they moved, John kept an eye on the hallway, watching for any signs of alien soldiers. He didn't trust the quiet. It was too calm, too still. Then they rounded a corner and came face to face with another group of soldiers. They were positioned in a formation, blocking their path. John's heart sank, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Stay behind me," he whispered to the prisoner, his voice low and determined. There was no turning back. They had to fight their way through. The door to the docking bay was close, but the aliens wouldn't let them go without a fight. John raised his weapon, his breath steady, and prepared for the battle that was about to unfold. Humanity's revenge had only just begun. John's heart pounded as he stood in front of the advancing alien soldiers, his weapon raised and his mind racing for a plan. The soldiers were blocking their path to the docking bay, the last place where they could escape this nightmare. There were 6 of them, all armed with heavy energy rifles, their bodies towering and armored. But John had something they didn't: determination and a fire in his heart that wouldn't be extinguished. "Stay behind me," John whispered to the prisoner, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. The prisoner, still trembling from the near escape, nodded but stayed close, knowing he was too weak to fight. The first alien soldier raised its rifle, aiming directly at John. But before it could fire, John dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. The energy beam sizzled through the air where he'd been standing, leaving scorch marks on the wall. He rolled, coming up with his stun weapon already aimed, and fired. The soldier went down in an instant, crumpling to the floor with a grunt of surprise. The remaining 5 soldiers reacted quickly, their rifles trained on John's position. They advanced cautiously, but they were slow. They had underestimated the humans' ability to adapt. The ship's alarms were blaring in the background, adding to the chaos, but John's focus was singular: survival. Without wasting time, John grabbed the prisoner and pulled him into a nearby alcove, using the shadows to their advantage. The aliens were closing in, but John wasn't going to wait for them to get close enough to overpower them. He knew they had only moments before more soldiers arrived. "There's a terminal up ahead," John muttered to the prisoner, his eyes scanning the room for an escape route. "We need to get to it. Can you run?" The prisoner, still shaking but determined, nodded. I think so." John quickly formulated a plan. He couldn't take on all 5 aliens at once, but if he could create a diversion, they might have a chance. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small explosive device, something he'd managed to scavenge during his time on the ship. He placed it carefully around the corner of the hallway and set the timer. The alien soldiers were getting closer, their footfalls growing louder. John turned to the prisoner, his voice firm. "Stay low. We move when it goes off." They waited in tense silence, the seconds stretching out like an eternity. The aliens were almost upon them, their voices growing louder, more confident. They had no idea what was about to happen. Then the explosion went off. The blast was deafening. The shockwave sent the soldiers flying backward, their bodies slammed against the walls. It wasn't enough to kill them, but it was enough to disorient them, sending them into a frenzy of confusion. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the walls shook under the force of the blast. "Now," John shouted, grabbing the prisoner's arm and pulling him toward the terminal. They ran through the disorientated soldiers, who were struggling to regain their footing. John kept his head down, focusing solely on the terminal at the far end of the hallway. The ship's layout flashed in his mind, the docking bay only a few corridors away. They just had to make it. As they neared the terminal, John grabbed the prisoner by the shoulders. "Stay here. Keep down. I'll disable the security systems." The prisoner didn't question him, just crouched low behind a metal console, peeking out cautiously. John approached the terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. The alien system was tricky, but after years of being a prisoner, John knew it better than his own home. He was quick, scanning for the security protocols that would lock down the docking bay and override them. A loud crackle echoed through the hallway. One of the aliens had regained its senses and was coming for them. John's heart raced as he worked faster, trying to bypass the defenses. The screen flickered in front of him, the final layer of security standing between him and their escape. His hands shook, but he forced himself to stay calm. His finger hovered over the last button. If he pressed it now, they could escape. But if he failed, they would be caught, and this ship would be their tomb. He pressed it. The entire ship seemed to shudder as the security grid deactivated. The docking bay's doors slid open in front of him, revealing a small fleet of alien ships parked outside. They were their way out. "Let's go," John shouted, and the prisoner rushed to his side. But before they could take more than a few steps, the remaining aliens regained their bearings and aimed their weapons at them. There was no time to think. John turned to the prisoner, pushing him forward. "Get to the ship. I'll cover you." The prisoner hesitated, fear in his eyes, but John's commanding tone brooked no argument. The prisoner took off running toward the docking bay, while John fired another stun shot at the advancing aliens. He hit one, then another, buying the prisoner precious seconds. John turned to follow, but just as he moved toward the exit, the lead alien let out a primal roar and lunged at him. John barely had time to react, raising his weapon to fire, but the alien was fast, too fast. The blow struck John square in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor with a painful thud. His vision blurred for a moment, but he refused to let the pain take control. His hand shot out to grab the stun weapon. One last shot. With all the strength he could muster, he fired, hitting the alien square in the chest. The alien collapsed to the ground, its body twitching from the shock. But John didn't stop. He forced himself to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. The prisoner had almost reached the ship. John didn't look back as he sprinted toward the exit. His focus was on the ship and the future that awaited them. There was no turning back now. Humanity's revenge had only just begun, and the galaxy would soon learn that when you push humanity too far, there's no limit to what they will do. John reached the ship, dove inside, and slammed the door shut behind him. The engines roared to life, and the ship shot forward, breaking free from the enemy vessel. As they flew away, the stars ahead of them felt brighter than ever before. Humanity had struck back, and the galaxy would never be the same.